So by April 1896, the Matebele started a war that spread like a fire to the Mashona tribe. In June the same year, the war broke out in Mashonaland. The war was motivated by outstanding political, social, and economic dissatisfaction against the white men. So let us proceed with the causes of the war that is uprising. So causes one was land expropriation. The Bisak and the whites confiscated and gave the white settlers the better and the more fertile land of the Mashona without consulting the local chiefs. So formerly land was considered the property of the community, and it was the chief's duty to distribute lands. So on the other hand, the Ndebele were pushed into the reserves of the Shangani and Gwani, which had water shortages, and they were infested with tsetse flies respectively. Wars still. The Ndebele's population was too high to inhabit this barren land. The situation was at the Ndunagambo said one cause of dissatisfaction and unrest is that after we have lived many years in a spot, we are told that the white man has purchased it, and we have to go to reserve, that is incited the people to resist. That is to say, land alienation or land confiscation. So the white people, once they came in Zimbabwe, and particularly we talk about BSAC, that is the British South Africa Company. So once they came there, they confiscated, they took majority land without making them aware about what was going on, or without considering them. So this made them to resist after telling them that they have to move from where they lived to interiors or to other parts. So this made Shona and Ndebele resistance. Other factor was forced labor. The prevalent policy of the whites was to compel Africans in both Matabeleland and Mashonaland to supply labor. The commissioner in each district was given power to compel chiefs to offer laborers in mineral and farm cycles. All able-bodied men had to work regardless of their farmer status in the society. This was done against their will. Laborers were recruited by armed forces or by police who went around into village to seize people by force. That is to say, people of Mashona and Ndebele were forced to work in British rule against their will. So this made them to fight, and the labor force were recruited by the army and the police. That to say, they were forced by the army and the police that wherever you wish, no matter you wish or not, you must go and work in our farm. So this made them to prepare for the war or resistances. Harsh treatment, another point. In 1893, Mashonaland and the Matabeleland situation was as Sir Martin Richard I. The residence commissioner said the system was no better than slavery, the employers and the native. So commissioners used the jambo as a kind of way to mistreat the local people. The elder people were flogged and killed in public. The conditions in the mines were deplorable. The condition in the mines was too worse. That's why people said, no, enough is enough. Let us fight. Other point was taxation policies, whereby in 1894, the hat tax was introduced. Some of the Shona chiefs and their subjects refused the new laws introduced by the colonial administration, as well as the British technique of collecting taxes. There were also cases of officials grabbing cattle, goats, and grains from the people who could not manage to pay taxes. So those people were forced to pay tax, and wherever they failed to pay it, they had to pay either goats, cattle, and those at the other time they were grabbed their cattle and the goats and the grains, since they could not manage to pay tax. So tax defaulters were crucified and at times jailed without a trial or inflicted to manual labor. Thus, the nature of the taxation policies plus other discontents prompt the Chimurenga uprising, or led to the occurrence of Chimurenga War. Other point was low wages. Because of the Africans were subjected to forced labor in mines and on white farms, while they were low paid as return for their toil under atrocious conditions, including the nature of the work and the long working hours, interference in the Shona trade. The desire of Bisa Company to monopolize trade in Mashonaland contributed to the uprising. The Shonaland, for a considerable length of time, developed a trade relationship with the Portuguese, for which they sold gold dust, ivory for guns, and other cheap manufactured products. The British, however, intended to possess that commercial activity by force, in which they wanted the Shona to sell and buy from South Africa. Was still, the company wanted to control gold mining and not in buying gold from Africans. So this also led to the occurrence of Shona and Ndebele resistance. Other point was the abolition of Induna age regiments among the Matebele. Matebele were made to suffer socially and psychologically. Military towns were outlawed and the Ndunas were deprived their power, importance, and position. Above all, it was embarrassing for the British to nominate the Shona policemen to enforce law and order in the Ndebele areas. Such social grievances, coupled with other factors, helped to excite the Ndebele communities into the uprising. Other point was favoritism. The colonial government elevated injustice in both the Shona and Ndebele societies. There was very little justice bestowed on the African people. Most often, the colonial government gave positions of responsibilities to the people who were untrained, unseated, and unaccepted by the people. The administration even enacted laws that protected the white population against the Africans. For instance, the whites had fair punishments in comparison to those of the blacks. The traditional chiefs who had yielded great powers were suddenly, when reduced to the lot of commoners. The foreigners or foreign police were given the responsibility to ensure observance of law and order, and they maltreated the Africans. So this also made them to take action against the British rule. Other point was loss of cattle. Loss of cattle. That is to say, cattle were the backbone of people's livelihood or livelihood. It is believed that Lobengula possessed 250,000 cattle before his death. The Ndebele were only permitted to keep 493 out of the total number, and many of them were offered to the volunteers or to the Bisako. The others were dispatched to South Africa. Was still there was a Rwanda pest outbreak. So that is to say, in most cases, the British took those natives' land. For example, Bengula, who possessed a certain number of cattle, and out of this, the only half of the number, and more than them, were confiscated by the British government. So that to say, things were two wars. This made them to organize war, and as the result of Chimurenga resistances. Other point was that missionaries disregarded the traditions and the customs of the Shona. That is to say, cultural interferences. The Ndebele people, it has been argued the missionaries failed to understand the attachment the Shona had for their traditional religion and their own form of government. In Matabeleland, the missionaries wanted the Ndebele to alter their culture, ignoring especially their religion based on the Mwari cult. So they believed in this religion, Mwari cult. That was the reason probably why the mission stations were attacked during the uprising, since they failed to regard this tradition of Mwari cult, and this was believed as their god. Other point was desire for their lost independence. It encouraged the hostility on the part of the Ndebele to dismantle their monarch. The Ndebele people resisted in the hope of responses their lost independence. None of the Nduna was appointed in any responsibility of administration, responsibilities of administration, and as regards the Mashonaland, the white men had dominated even the chiefs' power to chastise the wrongdoers. Their own discipline was extremely brutal. The uprising therefore wanted to re-attain the pre-colonial administration, since their power or their independence were under the British control. That's why they just wanted to regain their lost independence. Jameson's raid. For a long time, dissatisfaction among the Shona and the Ndebele people were piling up, accumulating, but hardly ignited the war. The immediate cause of the uprising war was Jameson's raid in December 1895. Dr. Jameson commanded a party of policemen to capture the defeat Transvaal for Cecil Rhodes, who was the leader of South Africa companies. The Boers, deceitfully overpowered him. To avoid the shame, Jameson was returned to British. This was clear sign to the it is the clear, to avoid the shame, Jameson was returned to British, and this was a clear sign to the Ndebele that even the British were weak and they could be subdued like other African tribes. Hence, the Shona and Ndebele adjourned to attack British after seeing that they were not unbeatable. The uprising ended in 1897, but with a number of repercussions. The Africans who were fighting to repossess their independence achieved little success. That is to say, they are not much succeeded. They are not much succeeded for what they intended or for their goals. So the cause of the war, the Mlimo cult and the medium spirit leaders mobilized the people in the uprising. The Matebele mobilized the Mkwat and Sanyamosha, who had been most active. The Mashonaland, Banda, and the Ishawa grouped the Shona into military regimes. And the Ndebele chiefs, Priesti Ungula, and the Lobengula's son, Nyamanda, inspired the Ndebele uprising. Women, children, men, young and old fight and get rid of the white men from their land. The Africa warriors organized the war and took the whites by surprise, and it costed the whites lives. By 1897, the whites with the new coordination and tactics and defeated the Ndebele and finally the Shona. That's why it is Shona and Ndebele, since the war was between Shona against the British at the same time, Ndebele against the British. Then we have consequences of the Chimurenga uprising. The Chimurenga warriors were taught bitter lesson, and many of them died during the confrontation. The Bisako administration incorporated and appropriated more fertile land and the cattle as war indemnity. Those are some of the consequences. The company administration received much criticism from the colonial office for mistreatment of the natives. The Cecil Rhodes guaranteed to make changes in governing the Matebele land. So they were blamed. Why did they mistreated the indigenous, the natives? That's why Cecil Rhodes decided to have or to make some reforms in his administration. Also, the Ndebele were redistributed new lands in the lowlands, where they lived happily unpitied by the company and European mistreatment. So then the British government decided to redistribute the land, new lands in lowland, where those natives lived at least happily, though it was not almost, but at least happily. Also, Ndebele in numerals were considered and employed in various administrative positions under the Bisak administration. This was the other consequence. Most of the educated Ndebele were given responsibilities as administrators in Mashonaland. While Matebele were allocated to most European settlers, created their settlement in the fertile land that formerly belonged to Shona and Ndebele. Also, many Africans adopted Christianity due to the inability of Mwari cult and the Chanimka or medium spirit to defeat the white men. So most of people were accepted Christianity. since they failed to believe their God or their beliefs, since they were not helping them to defeat the white men. Because of the failure in the war, the Mwarkat leaders could no longer command popularity in the eyes of a rising number of people, abandoning traditional religion and adopting Christianity. So then this Mwari, their God or their leaders were no longer respected or believed to the majority or by their followers, since they claimed that they were not helped by them or by it. That's why many people were adopting Christianity. Also, confrontation witnessed the unification of traditional foes against the shared enemy, a cohesion that was exploited well. But Ndebele claims were recognized and they were given warm treatments from the whites, because Ndebele looked for peace while the Shona persisted in war. So this is war in Zimbabwe, that is the Shona and Ndebele. So out of Zimbabwe there was other resistance in Namibia, and this is Nama and the Herero resistances or uprising, and this was between 1904 up to 1907, and this was in Namibia, and this resistance was against German rule. So the German occupation and imposition of its colonial rule in Namibia met with a limited success in the 1880s and 1890s. The region was inhabited by three main ethnic groups. The first and the second group comprised the Bantu, people of Ambo and Herero, who engaged in crop cultivation and livestock keeping. The other group comprised the Nama, who were Hotatos and engaged in pastoralism. Both groups depend on land for cultivation and pastures. So the history of Namibia in the 19th century was characterized by intense conflicts between the Nama and Herero, who engaged in pastoralism. That is to say, they had conflict, and this conflict included themselves, Nama and Herero. Since both groups depend on land for cultivation and pasture, the history of Namibia during that time characterized with conflicts between Nama and Herero, who engaged in pastoralism and hunting. So after the arrival of Europeans, the conflict was intensified, since these foreigners used the river for their benefits, or used this conflict for their benefits. So Herero welcomed the Germans, who offered them a treaty of protection and proposed to help them against the Nama. That is to say, collaboration method was used here between Herero and Germans, whereby Germans promised the Herero to defend them from Nama or protect them from Nama. But this German and the Herero alliances was opposed by the Nama leader, that is Hendrik Witbooi, since he understood the nature and the real aims of Germans. So they made collaboration for the both sides, Herero as well as Nama. But this leader, Gent Hendrik Witbooi, refused, since he understood what German aimed. So Chief Hendrik Witbooi realized that the Herero chief could become just a mere subordinate chief under the German. So later on, In 1884, Germans declared a protectorate over Namibia. They also occupied the region effectively. The German government introduced the settler policy between 1884 and 1904, which affected both the Nama and the Herero, hence accumulated a lot of grievances, which resulted into uprising. As how Gent Witboy thought, then later on it was experienced. So then after, let us discuss causes of Nama and the Herero uprising. So after what German did, then these two tribes decided to unite together and fight against German. So let us check those causes of Nama and Herero resistance. Causes 1, the imposition of forced labor in 1896. So Germany wanted laborers to work in plantations and in the construction of infrastructures such as roads, railway, as well as public buildings. So African communities, that is Nama and Herero, were not used to the manual labor, hence resisted to do it so. So they were forced to work on German farms, German constructions, German activities, while the people were not ready to do it so. That's why they organized the resistances. Another point was cattle riding or cattle confiscation. That was done frequently by the German traders and settlers. But cattle was the most treasured commodity to those people. That's why they decided to resist it. Other point was land alienation. This included grabbing much of the best grazing land in the central plateau of Namibia. German government received the fertile land for settler settlement, while the Nama and the Herero depend on this land for cultivation and pasture. They were thrown out of this fertile land so as to get room for construction of railway and the roads. This in turn created hostility between African communities and Germans as the result of Nama and Herero resistance. Other point was imposition of taxes, heavy taxes. So Germans imposed the taxes that had to be paid by Africans. They began to demand taxes in 1896 in order to make effective collection of taxes. Germany used the force, but African communities like the Eastern Herero and the Banderu resisted by taking up arms against Germans. So they decided to take action so that to send the message to the German that we are not aware or we are not ready for what you want. Other point was the destruction of traditional authorities. That is to say, after they had established their control over Namibia, Germans did not pay attention to the region. For example, they imposed some policies without consulting the traditional chiefs. So this made them not to be aware. That's why they decided to resist against them. Harassment to the Herero indebted people by the German following the credit ordinance of 1805. So harassment to the Herero indebted people. So there are some of the people who had debts, and these debts included tax paying. So for those who were not paid tax, they included as indebted people, and they were badly treated. So this made them not to be ready against this. Other point was the outbreak of Rinda pest disease, and this killed about 19% of the Nama and the Herero's cattle in 1905, and this affected much their economy, and the men sold their idle land, and they believed that this disease was brought by German. That's why they decided to. So we have a task that is compare and contrast between Nama and Herero resistance against Shona and Ndebele. Thank you.
Purchase your tracks today.